Working relationships are long-term things. You might work with somebody for a period of time and they might pop up again and you might be able to be helpful to them or they might be helpful to you. Investing in relationships, being a reliable person that people value, that's worth a lot. And you never know when the time and effort that you spent helping somebody or being useful in your role in the past is going to show up later and pay dividends.
All right, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to the Dealmaker Show. Today we have an amazing guest. He's a founder, a repeated founder, a founder that has done, exits. His last company also raised quite a bit of money. We're going to be talking about open sourcing, knowing when is the right time to turn page and to move on to the next chapter, as well as managing relationships and as well as the building and scaling and financing that we like to hear. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest today, Wes McKinney. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So Wes, originally born near Philadelphia, but you did travel quite a bit. Give us a walk through memory lane. How was life growing up for you?
Yeah, well, my dad was in the newspaper business, so managing newspapers. We moved around a fair bit growing up. So I have no memory of the Philadelphia area, but was born there. And when I was a year old, we moved to Knoxville, Tennessee. And so I had split about half my childhood in Knoxville and the other half in Northeast Ohio. So I graduated from high school in Akron, Ohio, a little suburb of Akron called Cuyahoga Falls. And then I left the Midwest, went to MIT and studied math. And so initially I was interested in becoming a mathematician or doing something more academic, and had a passing interest in computers and computer programming, and didn't realize that my future career would lie in computer programming and data science and entrepreneurship. But sometimes we stumble into things and we find our passion, and so I'm okay with how things ended up.
How did you develop that love for math? How did you get into math?
It was pretty self-driven. Like, I think I enjoyed the structured aspect of problem solving and abstract thinking and being able to solve like more and more difficult problems, building up a stack of tools that fit together and enable you to think through these really like complex or abstract problems. And when I was in high school, I started doing math competitions, and I went to a high school that didn't have, like, it did have a math team, but it was a little bit self-organized by the students. Like, there was a teacher who helped facilitate, but we didn't have a lot of formal instruction or like former mathletes to help teach us. So I went down the rabbit hole of doing math competitions, and did pretty well at the state and national level and in high school, but I never reached like the USA Math Olympiad or the International Math Olympiad or anything like that. But that was kind of my interest in math at the time. And I'd done a little bit of computers, but high school for me was basically math and a little bit of computers and foreign languages. But when I got to college, I pretty quickly realized that like I wasn't going to become the greatest mathematician, and so I should find something more practical to apply myself to that could have more more impact in the world, something less abstract, something more applied and tangible in terms of having more of a real effect in the world outside of the esoteric world of theoretical mathematics.
Well, let's talk about you got into finance after college and you got into AQR, and one thing that you did there that perhaps is going to be quite interesting to our listeners is open sourcing IP from a financial firm. That sounds quite the challenge.
Yeah, it wasn't easy. So I started building a body of Python language code in 2008. Basically building a little miniature research framework for myself at AQR so that I could do my work faster, be more productive, and be better at my job. And it was also an experiment to learn Python programming and try to use Python for doing data analysis. And I found that I really enjoyed building tools for working with data and also building tools for other people. But it was totally a skunk work, so something that wasn't really sanctioned or authorized or planned by the management of the company. Like I think I showed up one day and I had rebuilt like a number of pieces of fund infrastructure in Python just so that I could do research. And I found a couple of champions in leadership who said, "This seems really interesting. We should give him a couple of people to work with, a little more room to focus on this and see if it could be a viable path for the future of the company." And they ultimately, decided to use Python to rebuild and to build the future models for that run the business. And now I believe AQR, along with a lot of the financial industry, runs on Python based on like those core principles from 15, 17, 18 years ago. But in 2009, after working on this for about a year, I started making the pitch about open sourcing some of the core IP, which was the data analysis framework, which is now known as the Pandas project, which is it's now a very popular Python data science library for working with data. And so I would say it took probably 6 months to get everybody convinced and to get all the lawyers convinced and to figure out the licensing and make sure that it wasn't going to create liability for the company and it wasn't going to give away our secret sauce and give away our edge to competitors. But I think I convincingly made the argument that it would serve mostly as an advertisement for the fund, that smart programmers could come to AQR and work on tools like Pandas, and they could use Python, and also that people outside of the company would contribute to the project and make it better, and that we would reap the fruits of the external open source community. So it required a bit of a leap of faith on everybody's part, but I think in the fullness of time, it's been a good decision, and it also helped catalyze the growth of the Python data science ecosystem, because Pandas, along with a number of other projects that came about in that era, all fit together to create a really productive environment for doing data analysis and data science work. And I think without it and the other projects that happened at the same time, it's unclear that Python would be where it is today as like the number one language of AI and data science. Because at a certain point, Google and Meta, formerly Facebook, and all these companies piled on, and they chose Python as the language where they were going to build their AI frameworks. And so now all of the LLMs and all the AI frameworks are all built in Python. So it's definitely a big change versus 20 years ago when people were questioning whether Python was like a safe language to build real software in.
Well, no kidding. Now, in your case, you go from there into thinking that maybe a PhD is your next chapter, but then you drop out and you really enter the world of entrepreneurship. So how did that happen?
Yeah. So I did start a PhD in statistics at Duke, and because I wanted to develop just a better academic and applied foundation for doing data science work. But while I was in grad school, I started getting pinged by folks who had seen Pandas, and they'd seen like one of my first conference talks, which is about using Python for quantitative finance. And so I saw that there was a lot of interest in using Python for real industry work. And so I said to myself, well, I can't stay in grad school and not have this be my primary focus. So I took leave from grad school, ultimately dropped out, went back to New York, and worked full time on open source. I had a couple of small contracts to help pay my rent. But really it was an exploration of, see how far down the well goes, so to speak. I got a couple of my colleagues from AQR to join up with me and start exploring entrepreneurial ideas. Initially, we were interested in building a financial analytics framework that was based in Python, but we found that it was going to be pretty difficult to get hedge funds and other financial institutions to buy it, at least for a price that would make sense as a startup. So we ultimately decided to not pursue that route. But then, so yeah, Adam Klein and Chang Shi. So Chang and I ultimately decided to found a different company called DataPad, so which was more of like a business analytics, business intelligence company, all Python powered. We raised a seed round from Excel in the beginning of 2013. Decided that building the company in San Francisco was the best thing, and so we moved from New York to SF in beginning of 2013, and built the company there in the heart of Soma.
That's amazing. So obviously with a DataPad, venture-backed business, as you were saying. Now, in this case, with DataPad, what I want to ask you is how, and I'm sure that there's a lot of founders that are listening now. I think it will be very impactful for them. How do you think as a founder, and I guess in this case, in this story with DataPad, how did you guys think about exiting well? And when did you think that, in terms of timing, that it was the right time to do so? Walk us through how that process was.
Yeah, so we worked on the company for about 2 years before we exited in an acquihire type exit to Cloudera at the end of 2014. And so initially, after we raised our seed round, we hired a small team, and we were really heads down building the product and working with some initial design partners on using the product and getting feedback. But in the broader context of the time, we were in a really crowded space. Even though we were building a business analytics product that featured Python and Python extensibility at its core, like we were classified in the business intelligence space, which was super crowded in that time. And there were some really successful companies that were founded around that time, like Looker, that were taking up all of the attention of the venture community. And so when we went to raise our Series A round in 2014, we saw pretty quickly that we were facing an uphill battle in terms of differentiating ourselves and succeeding in this ultra crowded market. And at a certain point, we were contemplating a bridge round of financing, and we decided it would be better to find the right home for the team, a place where we could exit well, that as co-founders, a place where we want to end up, and to get good jobs for as many people on the team as we could. But we didn't want to. We entertained like a number of offers. I think we ultimately had four different offers to exit. So we ran like a pretty tight M&A process. It came together really quickly. But we ended up choosing Cloudera because we knew that we were passionate about data infrastructure and open source software, and so we decided we wanted to be in a place that valued those things, where we could continue to make an impact in the space of open source data science and data infrastructure.
So, talking about open source and ecosystem, and obviously after Cloudera, you did a little bit of time there, but after the integration, you basically went at it with working at Two Sigma, and then from there, it all matured into getting into what became Voltron Data, your next company. So, what events needed to happen for you to feel really good and comfortable with the thought of doing it again?
Yeah, it was a bit of a winding journey from the exit to Cloudera in 2014 to founding Voltron Data in 2020. But initially, when I was at Cloudera, a group of other open source developers and I created a new open source project called Apache Arrow, which was a new data connectivity and data acceleration framework. And so initially we focused on just building that project. And after about 6 months or so, I realized that Cloudera was not going to be the best place to continue that work. And Two Sigma got in touch with me because they had seen the early Arrow work. They offered to hire me to work on Arrow. I was like, this sounds great. After very productive couple of years being full time at Two Sigma, there were a bunch of other companies that were interested in committing capital to fund Aero development. So that included NVIDIA, some other financial firms like Bloomberg. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to leave Two Sigma and go join NVIDIA or join, probably would have been a good financial decision for me to join NVIDIA in 2016, or 2018. So I created a kind of nonprofit industry consortium to be able to combine all of those commitments of capital into one place so that we can continue working on the project without necessarily founding a for-profit company. And so it took like a pretty long time for me to convince myself that there was even a business to be created around Aero. And so I think the big lesson was that, firstly, like I needed to collect evidence that there was a need in the market, that there was a product to be created and something that needed a startup, not to found a startup just to found a startup, but actually there was a real need and a product to be created. I needed to feel conviction about going down the startup path, because startups are really difficult. Like it's just a lot of work. It's a lot of relationships to manage. You have your investors, you have your team. You're carrying a lot of weight on your shoulders. And having been through that the first time at a small scale with DataPad, I was familiar with like the emotional burden that you carry as a founder, and how much what a toll that process takes on you. But by 2020, just as the impact of Aero was snowballing, we built up. So Neil Richardson and I, who were leading Ursa Labs, we built up the conviction that it was time to found a company. And we'd built Ursa Labs inside our studio, which is now called Posit, so the data science platform company. So they were, in effect, our startup incubator. Where we set up a separate entity for all of the commitments of funds to support the development work. But the team, like all the operational side, like the healthcare and benefits and all that, was managed by our studio, Posit. So in 2020, middle of 2020, it was COVID. We were all quarantining at home, but we decided to spin out of we decided to spin out of Posit to create a startup, and we raised our initial round of venture capital, led by Google Ventures and GV and Walden in August 2020. So we were off to the races.
So obviously, that became Voltron Data. For the people that are listening, to really get it, what ended up being the business model of Voltron Data?
Yeah. So just kind of briefly explain how we went from Ursa Labs to Ursa Computing to Voltron Data. So we raised the seed round for Ursa Computing, which was the startup that spun out of Ursa Labs, and so at the end of the year, I started talking with Josh Patterson, who led the Rapids team at NVIDIA. It was a GPU acceleration framework for analytics at NVIDIA. And they were interested in founding a company. And there was another startup that had been around for a few years called Blazing SQL that was working closely with the Rapids team to build a GPU accelerated data engine. And so we had business ideas we were pursuing at Ursa Computing around enterprise support for Apache Aero, as well as improving and accelerating enterprise data connectivity. And so pretty quickly, ideas percolated to create a super company that could bring all of these concepts together. And during that time, we spent more time talking with Lip-Bu Tan and his fund Walden. So Lip-Bu is now the CEO of Intel. And they were really keen to, if we could bring all of these folks together, that there was a lot of appetite to bring significant capital to the table to build an accelerated computing company around all of our ideas. And so we were able to do that in the beginning of 2021. There was a little bit of sausage making with reorganizing the company to make sure everybody had equity stakes that they were happy with, and to get the rounds of funding done. But by the end of 2021, we had we had a Series A in the works to bring our total capital raise to $110 million, and so we were suddenly operating on a scale of business that was an order of, or probably two orders of magnitude more than what I had been involved with before with DataPad, which was a small seed round.
So you said
a decade before that.
Series A to 110 million. That's quite a lot of money for being at a Series A.
It is, yeah. I mean, it was the first. It was the first. I guess it's funny these days. Some what you call a Series Seed, or what you call a Series Seed versus a Series A. I think the reason that we called it a Series A, because it reflected, firstly, the stage of the business. Like, we were definitely a Series A company in terms of like where we were at in the development timeline, but also like the level of ambition of the business to build an accelerator native multi hardware distributed execution engine, to do that and support the development and growth of the Aero ecosystem, to do enterprise support and partner with other vendors to become more Aero native. I mean, we were tackling like a very ambitious space, and so I think the $100 million Series A, $110 million Series A, it also reflected the scale, the scope, and ambition of the business.
So I guess for you guys too. I mean, that was quite the ride, quite the journey. I guess, at what point do you realize that maybe it's time to turn page? I mean, how do you go about doing that as a founder of a company, and especially in this case, as a founder of such a fantastic, meaningful operation that you guys had built?
Yeah. Well, we had we went from in 2021. We went from when we initially put the company together, we were around 35 people, and we went from 35 people to 130 people in about a year. So definitely some pretty intense blitz scaling. And we had a large founding team, and so and also fairly diverse in terms of like the different product directions that we were pursuing. The big thing that changed between when we founded the company and when I decided to step out of my full-time operational role, well, there was a number of things that happened. So firstly, the economic environment in 2021 was very different from the economic environment at the end of 2022. Interest rates went up a lot. Capital became a lot harder to raise, and we had to make a conscious decision as a company to really focus in on narrower verticals in our product strategy, where we felt that we could place fewer bets, but the areas where we could be really, really successful. And so the area where the company focused in on was the large scale GPU accelerated data workloads. And so for me, like, there were a number of directions that I was interested in pursuing in the company, that we just couldn't fit into our short-term product strategy. And we had built an amazing team to work on the GPU accelerated side of the business. And so increasingly, like, as time went on, I felt that the impact that I had brought to the business was in building the underlying core technology. So that's Apache Arrow, and helping catalyze the creation of these frameworks that we were using to build the company's products. Getting the company started, raising money, building the leadership team, building up the engineering team. But I felt the desire to be able to spend my time on a broader portfolio of projects. Like, I had started investing more actively. Like I wanted to be able to spend more time, more time investing, but without feeling guilty about taking energy away from my startup. So there were a bunch of factors that led me to feel that it was best for me to not be in a full-time operational role, so I could spend more time investing, spend more time working with other founders on projects that are based on the Aero ecosystem. As I saw that there were like lots of new companies being founded
Well, let's
in
talk
and around
about
Aero.
that.
Yeah.
Why don't we double click on that, Wes? Because on the investment side, you've done about 40 investments. I mean, you've done 40 angel investments. Now you got the venture fund that you got going to. I guess as part of these investments that you've done and working with founders, I guess when you've done over 40, you develop pattern recognition to see what works and what doesn't, right? When it comes to investing in founders. What are, would you say, the three key ingredients that you see repeating from those founders that tend to be, the ones that they have more chances of succeeding?
Yeah, I mean, the investments that I've made have been focused in data infrastructure, data science, accelerated computing, and developer tools more generally. Like I've tended prefer to work with deep tech companies or founding teams that are technical. Since I'm a technical founder, like I enjoy working with with other technical founders, especially technical CEOs. And I think especially as like, we created the Aero project in 2015, 2016. And, a few years later, there started to be more and more companies that were using Aero and related technologies as part of their core technology platform. And so I said to myself, like, well, if companies are going to, use this technology, like I would like to be involved and be as helpful as I can to these companies. And so I initially started angel investing as a way to be involved and to participate in the success of entrepreneur friends of mine who would start companies and I'd say, hey, could I invest in your company? And they would let me. But now it's become a little more structured where I'm thinking about broader technology trends and theses that I have around, like, one of these core ideas is this notion of the composable data stack and enabling data systems, data infrastructure to become more modular, composable, and interoperable, which is one of the central ideas of Aero. And so I think about older legacy systems and how could we rebuild those systems in a way that incorporates these principles of modularity and composability and interoperability. And so, in terms of the investments, if I meet founders who have the right stuff, the background, technical background, the ability to execute, but also are operating on a similar intellectual wavelength where they perceive like what is wrong with the prior generations of technologies, they have an idea about what they can make better. So I think the right way of thinking, that being able to visualize what the future might look like if with their contributions through their companies, combine that with the ability to execute. And so, when I meet with founders, it's really, I'm trying to recognize those attributes, and just looking at people's track record and what they've done in the past, and I think the joke among, or the saying among venture investors is always to try to skate where the puck is going.
Yeah, no kidding. Now imagine, if I could bring you back in time, and I could bring you back to that moment where you were working at AQR and thinking about maybe starting something of your own. And you had the opportunity of having a chat with that younger Wes and giving that younger Wes one piece of advice before launching a company. What would that be and why, given what you know now?
It's important to know yourself and your strengths, and to be really mindful in choosing who to work with. So firstly, to choose to work with people who you're in sync in terms of your values and how you think about how you operate day to day, how you communicate, but also looking for folks that people you can work with who can fill in the gaps in your skill set, because realistically, like, you can't be great at everything. um, and so, being honest with yourself, and the things that you're good at, the things that you're not good at, and the things areas where you're not as good. Obviously, you can grow and you can get better, but you need to seek out people who are really good in those areas, who can kind of bring the whole picture, into balance. And something that I've learned, I think I've always felt this way, but even more so as time has gone on, is that working relationships are long-term things. And you might work with somebody for a period of time, and they might pop up again, and you might be able to be helpful to them, or they might be helpful to you in some way. And so I think being a reliable person of integrity, who's helpful and upstanding, consistently a useful person over time, I think that bears that bears dividends. And so investing in relationships, being a reliable person that people value, that's worth a lot. And you never know when the time and effort that you've spent helping somebody or being useful in your role in the past is going to show up later and pay dividends.
That's so profound. I love it, Wes. For the people that are listening that would love to reach out and say hi, what is the best way for them to do so?
You can reach out on LinkedIn. I'm here and there. I try not to spend a lot of time on social media. I guess these days LinkedIn is basically social media. I do have an X Twitter account, less and less active there. I'm also on Blue Sky. I think on Twitter X, I'm Wes McKinney, and Blue Sky, I think I'm my domain name, wesmckinney.com. I've blogged, and I have a blog and a Python book, Python for data analysis, and you can read that on my blog. I haven't been writing as much lately, but whenever inspiration strikes and I have something to say, I do enjoy writing here and there.
Amazing. Well, Wes, thank you so much for being on the Dealmaker Show today. It has been an absolute honor to have you with us.
Thanks again for having me. It's great.